Chapter 12. His control slips. Control is not a gift. It is a discipline. I have spent 34 years perfecting the art of the mask. I have sat across from world leaders, ruthless hedge fund managers, and federal investigators, and not a single one of them has ever seen my pulse quicken or my resolve flicker. I am the man who wins because I am the man who feels nothing until the deal is closed. But as I stood in the center of my dressing room, staring at the 3 different black tuxedos laid out before me, I realized the discipline was failing. My hands weren't shaking, but my mind was a riot of images from the night before. Maya on my desk, Maya in my bed, Maya's voice, broken and breathless, calling my name. Tonight was the Blackwood Foundation Gala. It was the most important social event of the year, a night where the city's elite gathered to throw money at charities in exchange for the chance to stand in my shadow. Normally, I treated these events like a chess match. Tonight, I felt like the board was on fire. "Sir," Marcus's voice came from the doorway. "The car is downstairs. Miss Sterling is waiting in the foyer." "I'll be down in a moment, Marcus." I adjusted my bow tie, my eyes fixed on my reflection. I looked like Alexander Blackwood. Sharp, expensive, dangerous. But the man behind the eyes was slipping. I was hyper-aware of the fact that Maya was only floors away, dressed in something I hadn't seen yet, preparing to stand by my side in front of the very people who wanted to destroy me. I walked out into the foyer. The Vigil of Justice statue stood silent guard, but my eyes went straight to the woman standing next to it. Maya was wearing a gown of midnight blue, nearly black, made of a silk so fine it looked like water poured over her skin. It was backless, a daring plunge that revealed the elegant curve of her spine, the skin I had mapped with my lips only hours ago. Her hair was swept up in a sophisticated knot, exposing the graceful line of her neck. She looked like a queen. She looked like a secret I didn't want to share. "You look." The word beautiful felt too small. It felt like an insult to the way she actually looked. "Adequate for the occasion," I finished, my voice sounding like gravel. Maya smiled, a knowing, dangerous little smile. "Adequate. I'll have to try harder next time, Mr. Blackwood." "Don't," I warned, walking toward her. I stopped just inches away, the scent of her jasmine perfume hitting me like a physical blow. "If you try any harder, I'll be forced to cancel the gala and keep you locked in this penthouse for the rest of the month." "Is that a threat or a promise?" She whispered, her hazel eyes dancing with challenge. "It's a warning." I reached out, my fingers grazing the bare skin of her shoulder. I felt the tiny shiver that went through her, and a surge of primitive satisfaction hit my gut. "Tonight, you stay by my side. You don't talk to the press. You don't dance with anyone but me. Do you understand?" "You're very possessive tonight, Alexander. Is your control slipping?" "My control is exactly where it needs to be," I lied. I led her toward the elevator, my hand resting on the small of her back. The touch was electric, a constant reminder of the fire burning under the surface. As we descended toward the lobby, I realized that I wasn't going to the gala to raise money. I was going there to show the world that Maya Sterling was mine, and that was my first mistake. A man in control doesn't feel the need to prove anything. Maya POV. The grand ballroom was a sea of diamonds, champagne, and vultures. As soon as we walked in, the temperature of the room seemed to shift. The music didn't stop, but the conversations did. Every head turned. Every eye tracked us. I felt the weight of 1,000 judgments, but I kept my chin up, my hand resting lightly on Alexander's arm. He was a wall of cold, silent power beside me. He didn't smile at the photographers. He didn't acknowledge the whispers. He moved through the crowd like a king walking through a conquered city. "Mr. Blackwood, a moment." A journalist from the Wall Street Journal lunged forward, microphone in hand. "Is it true that the Sterling IP is the backbone of the New Horizon project? And who is the woman on your arm?" Alexander didn't even slow down. "The Horizon project is the future of Blackwood Industries, and this is Miss Sterling, my senior advisor. Her presence here is strictly professional." Strictly professional. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked up at him, but his profile was as unreadable as granite. He was back in his shell, the man from the office, the man who lived by rules and logic. It shouldn't have hurt, but it did. For the next hour, I was paraded around the room. I was introduced to mayors, governors, and rival CEOs. I played my part perfectly. I spoke about the mapping algorithm, the clinical trials, and the ethical safeguards. I saw the surprise on their faces when they realized I wasn't just a decorative piece, as Alexander had once put it. I was the brain behind the beauty. But throughout it all, I felt Alexander's hand on my back. It never left. It was a brand, a constant claim of ownership that felt increasingly heavy. "Alexander, I need a drink," I whispered during a brief lull in conversation. "Marcus will get you one." "I want to walk to the bar myself. I've been standing in this one spot for 20 minutes. He looked at me, his gray eyes narrowing. He didn't want to let me go. I could see the struggle in his face, the fight to maintain the appearance of a professional relationship, while his instincts were telling him to pull me into the nearest dark corner. "5 minutes," he said, his voice tight. "And don't talk to anyone." I walked away before I could snap at him. I needed a moment of air. I needed to be Maya Sterling again, not just an advisor to a man who was clearly losing his mind. The bar was at the far end of the ballroom. I ordered a glass of champagne and turned to look at the crowd. From this distance, Alexander looked like a statue. He was surrounded by a group of investors, his posture perfect, but I saw the way his eyes kept dartling toward the bar. He was tracking me. He was obsessed. "It's a heavy weight, isn't it?" I turned to see a man standing next to me. He was handsome in a polished, almost oily way, wearing a tuxedo that screamed old money. He was looking at Alexander with a mixture of envy and amusement. "I beg your pardon," I asked. "The Blackwood gaze," the man said, offering a hand. "I'm Julian Vane. My family has been trying to outmaneuver the Blackwoods for 3 generations. I know that look. It's the look Alexander gives a company right before he buys it and guts it." "I'm not a company, Mr. Vane." "No, you're clearly much more than that." Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I watched you in the meeting with the FDA last week. You were brilliant. It's a waste, really. Alexander doesn't know how to appreciate brilliance. He only knows how to dominate it." "You seem to have a lot of opinions for someone who hasn't been introduced to me," I said, taking a sip of my champagne. "I don't need an introduction to recognize a caged bird when I see one." Julian reached out, his hand moving as if to touch the silk of my dress. "Tell me, Maya, is the view from the top of Blackwood Tower worth the price of your soul?" "My soul is perfectly intact, Julian." I didn't hear Alexander approach. I didn't see him move. 1 second Julian was leaning toward me, and the next, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Alexander was there. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his hand. He simply stepped between us, his presence so massive and threatening that Julian actually took a step back. "Vane," Alexander said. The name was a low, lethal sound. Alexander. "We were just discussing the finer points of the Horizon project." "You were discussing things that don't concern you." Alexander's hand came up, resting on my waist with a grip that was far from professional. It was hard, possessive, and bruising. Miss Sterling is under my protection. If you so much as breathe in her direction again, I will ensure the Vane Group is nothing more than a footnote in next year's tax records. Julian's face went pale. It was just a conversation, Alexander. No need for the theatrics. Leave now. Julian didn't argue. He turned and vanished into the crowd. I looked at Alexander. He was breathing heavily, his eyes dark with a rage that was entirely out of proportion for a simple conversation. His mask was gone. The cold, calculating CEO had been replaced by a man who looked like he was ready to kill. "Alexander, you're hurting me," I whispered, looking down at his hand on my waist. He looked down, his eyes widening as he realized how hard he was gripping me. He jerked his hand away as if he'd been burned. "We're leaving," he said, his voice shaking. "The auction hasn't even started. We're the hosts." "I don't care about the auction. We're leaving." He grabbed my hand and led me through the crowd. He didn't stop for the donors, he didn't stop for Marcus, he didn't stop for the cameras. He pulled me through the service doors and into the quiet of the hallway. Alexander POV. My heart was a hammer in my chest. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears, a rhythmic, violent sound that drowned out everything else. I had just threatened a major rival in the middle of a public gala. I had abandoned my own foundation's event. I had acted like a common thug, and I didn't care. All I could think about was the way Vane had looked at her. All I could think about was the way he had almost touched her. The thought of another man's hands on Maya's skin, the skin that belonged to me, was enough to make me want to burn the entire city down. We reached the car. I shoved Maya inside and climbed in after her, slamming the door. "Elias, drive," I barked. "Go, anywhere, just drive." The car pulled away from the curb. The interior of the Maybach was dark, the only light coming from the passing street lamps. Maya was huddled in the corner, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and anger. "What is wrong with you?" she cried. "You just humiliated us both. You acted like a lunatic." "He was going to touch you," I growled, turning toward her. "He was talking to me. It's a gala, Alexander. People talk." "Not to you, not like that." I moved across the seat, pinning her against the door. "You don't understand. You don't see what they see. They see a vulnerability in me for the first time in my life. They see that I want you, and they're going to use that to destroy me." "Then let them." Maya shouted, her hands pushing against my chest. "If your empire is so fragile that a conversation with Julian Vane can bring it down, then maybe you don't deserve it." The words were a slap. I grabbed her wrists, pinning them to the seat on either side of her head. I was looming over her, my tuxedo jacket tight across my shoulders, my breathing ragged. "My empire isn't fragile, Maya, but I am." The admission hit the air like a bomb. I froze, the truth of it echoing in the silence of the car. I was fragile. For the first time in my life, I had something I couldn't afford to lose. I had something that money couldn't buy and power couldn't protect. I looked down at her. Her hair was mussed, her lips were trembling, and her eyes were filled with a raw, agonizing beauty. She was the most dangerous thing in my world, and I had invited her into my heart. "Alexander." She whispered, her anger softening into something else. "I can't control it," I said, my voice breaking. "I try. Every morning I wake up and I tell myself that you're just an advisor. I tell myself that the contract is the only thing that matters. But then I see you, and I hear your voice, and everything I've built just disappears." I let go of her wrists, my hands shaking. I sat back, burying my face in my hands. My control is gone, Maya. I'm a man who lives by logic, and I'm currently being ruled by a woman who hates me half the time. The silence in the car was heavy. I waited for her to laugh. I waited for her to tell me she was leaving, that the locked-in clause was a joke, that she was done with the drama of Alexander Blackwood. Instead, I felt a soft hand on my shoulder. "I don't hate you, Alexander," she said softly. I looked up. She had moved closer to me, her face inches from mine. "I hate the walls you build," she continued, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "I hate the way you treat people like assets, but I don't hate you. If I did, I wouldn't be here." "I made a fool of myself tonight," I muttered. "You made a human of yourself. There's a difference." She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine. "You're so afraid of losing control that you've forgotten how to live, Alexander. You don't have to own the world to be powerful. You just have to be real." I looked into her eyes, and for a second, the CEO was gone. There was only a man who was desperately, hopelessly in love with the only woman he couldn't manipulate. "I want you," I whispered. "Not because of the code, not because of the contract. I need you to be there when the lights go out." Maya didn't say a word. She reached up and pulled my head down, her mouth finding mine in a kiss that was filled with all the things we couldn't say. It wasn't a kiss of conquest. It was a kiss of surrender. I pulled her into my lap, my arms wrapping around her like she was the only thing keeping me from falling off the edge of the world. The silk of her dress was cool under my hands, but her skin was fire. I groaned into the kiss, my control slipping completely away, and for the first time in my life, I didn't try to catch it. Maya POV. The car was a cocoon of heat and darkness. I could feel the power of Alexander's body, the raw, unbridled need that he had been trying so hard to hide. He wasn't the billionaire boss right now. He was just a man who was terrified of how much he felt. And God, I felt it too. The fear, the desire, the overwhelming sense that we were both standing on the edge of something that would either save us or destroy us. I ran my hands through his hair, knocking his perfectly groomed style into a mess. I wanted to see him unraveled. I wanted to see the man behind the charcoal suit. "Alexander," I gasped as his mouth moved to my neck. "The driver." "The partition is up," he growled against my skin. "He can't see anything. He can't hear anything. Right now, the only two people in this world are you and me." He pulled the strap of my gown down, his lips finding the bare skin of my shoulder. I arched my back, my fingers digging into the expensive wool of his tuxedo. The contrast between the formal setting and the primal hunger of his touch was intoxicating. "You're mine," he whispered, his eyes locking on mine. They were no longer the cold gray of a winter sea. They were the color of smoke and flame. "Say it. No more rules, no more distance." "I'm yours," I whispered back. He didn't wait. He claimed me right there in the back of the car, with the lights of New York City blurring past the windows. It was fast, frantic, and filled with a desperation that made my heart ache. It was the sound of a man finally letting go of the weight he'd been carrying for a lifetime. When we finally reached the tower, the air in the car was thick and heavy. Elias opened the door, his face a mask of professional neutrality, but I could see the way his eyes lingered on Alexander's mussed hair and my disheveled dress. Alexander didn't care. He stepped out of the car and reached for my hand, pulling me toward the private elevator. We didn't say a word as we ascended. We didn't have to. The silence was no longer dangerous. It was a promise. We stepped into the penthouse. The vigil of justice was still there, but tonight the scales felt different. They weren't about law or contracts. They were about the balance between two souls. Alexander turned to me, his tuxedo jacket gone, his shirt unbuttoned. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. "The gala is going to be a scandal tomorrow," I said, trying to bring some reality back into the room. "The board will have questions. Marcus will have 100 fires to put out." "Let them," Alexander said, walking toward me. He took my face in his hands, his thumbs tracing my cheekbones. "Let them say I've lost my mind. Let them say I've lost my edge. As long as I haven't lost you, I don't give a damn about the rest of it." "You really mean that?" "I've never meant anything more." He kissed my forehead, a gesture of tenderness that surprised me. "Go to bed, Maya. Tomorrow the world will come knocking. But tonight we're just two people in a glass tower and the door is locked." Alexander POV. I watched her walk to her room. I was a man who had lost his control. I had embarrassed myself publicly, I had threatened a rival, and I had behaved like an animal in the back of my own car. By every metric I had lived my life by, I had failed. But as I stood in the dark living room, looking out at the city I owned, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt free. I walked over to the desk and picked up the sterling contract. I looked at the locked-in clause, the words I had written to ensure she couldn't leave me. I realized now that the contract wasn't for her. It was for me. It was the only way I knew how to hold onto something that was too beautiful to be real. I picked up a pen, and with a steady hand, I crossed out the entire clause. She wasn't locked in anymore. She was here because she chose to be. I put the contract back on the desk and walked toward my bedroom. The world would be waiting in the morning, with its scandals and its board meetings and its endless demands. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the morning. Because when I woke up, the first thing I would see wouldn't be a projection of my net worth. It would be her. And that was a deal I would make every single day for the rest of my life. Maya POV 3:00 a.m. I couldn't sleep. The events of the night were looping in my head, Julian Vane, the car, the look in Alexander's eyes when he said he was fragile. I got out of bed and walked into the living room, looking for a glass of water. The moonlight was reflecting off the vigil of justice. I noticed the contract lying on the desk. Curiosity got the better of me. I walked over and looked at it. My heart stopped. The locked-in clause was gone. A single, heavy line had been drawn through it, and underneath, in Alexander's sharp, decisive handwriting, were 4 words. "You are free, Maya." I felt a lump in my throat. He had given me exactly what I wanted. He had given me my freedom. He had removed the cage he had built around me. I looked toward his bedroom door. It was slightly ajar. I realized then that Alexander Blackwood hadn't just lost his control tonight. He had found his heart. And in doing so, he had given me the only thing I ever truly wanted from him. He had given me a choice. I walked back to my room, but I didn't go back to bed. I started to pack. Not because I was leaving, but because I needed to move my things into his room. If I was going to be here, I was going to be here on my terms. And my terms were that I was never going to let him be alone again. The control was gone, and thank God for that. Next chapter. Chapter 13, Her Past Surfaces.